Hello and welcome, this is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to create some disco ball cards using the new Shine Bright collection from Spellbinders. So this collection has some betterpress plates as well as layered stencils and hot foil plates and dies. So it's got a really good selection and they all work really well together, or you can use them separately or on other things as well. And I love the fact that there's two different sentiment types. We have the sentiment strips here and the sentiment press plates that I showed before with 4 different sentiments and coordinating dies. This one here is just the die that spells out Shine Bright and it has a shadow. And then there's also a Shine Bright layering stencil. The Glimmer foil plate here looks absolutely stunning and is perfect to go with those disco balls, but you could also use it on its own or with other die cuts as well. And I love the fact that there are disco ball die cuts as well as press plates, so it gives you a lot of options. So before I start making any cards, I'm going to do a bunch of hot foiling, and I'm going to use the silver Holographic Facets Glimmer foil. I just figured it was perfect for this style and for those disco balls, and it really does make them shine and shimmer in the light. So I have my Glimmer machine here. It's nice and hot. I'm putting the plate with the print side up, the foil with the pretty side down, and then I'm using Hammermill Cardstock to foil on. When I put it all together, my sandwich together, I press the timer button, and once that timer button goes off, I take it out of the Glimmer machine and put it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine, and then peel off that foil from the cardstock. Now that negative foil, I'm going to be doing the solid hot foiling later once I'm done foiling all of my images, so we're not going to let any of that go to waste. The next one that I'm doing is the Disco Impressions press plates here, and I love the fact that with press plates you can hot foil them or use them in your betterpress, so it just gives you so many more opportunities or options when it comes to them. I love that they do dual duty, but this is absolutely perfect with that Facets Glimmer foil on those disco balls. It's perfect. The only thing is I did place those plates a little bit too close, so once I'm done doing the rest of my hot foiling, I will go back and do that one again where I have them a little bit farther apart, making it a little bit easier to die cut them, because they do have circle die cuts to die cut them when you're done. Next, I'm doing all of the sentiments in the sentiment set because I want to make sure that I have lots of options when it comes to the card making. I want to make sure that I have, again, a lot of options. So by doing all of them, any of the ones that are left over, I'll just put them with my sentiments. I can use them on future cards. And the same with the sentiment strips. I'm doing both. There's 2 different plates and 2 different dies that go with it. And I'm doing all of them just to make sure that I have all of the sentiment options available when I am doing the card making. And I find it easiest to do it this way, do a full foiling session, have everything foiled ahead of time. So then when I'm doing the card baking, everything is ready to go. And I even go ahead and do my die cutting of my sentiments as well as the disco balls before I start my card baking, because I don't want to stop when I'm in the middle of that to take out my machine and do my die cutting. If it's all done, ready to go, then it gives me everything easy, nice and easy to quick and grab, or nice and easy to quickly grab. So it's really easy to do a full foiling session ahead of time while that machine is hot. It takes a little bit of time, but you might as well do it. And I hold my press plates or quickly grab my press plates with my hands. They are hot, so if you have sensitive hands, you'll definitely want to use the tool that comes with it. I can handle the plates with my hands because I wash dishes with really hot water multiple times a day, so I'm used to the heat. I wouldn't sit there holding them in my hands, but just to grab them and put them on the silicone mat that comes with the Glimmer machine doesn't bother me. So with my regular foiling done, now I'm just doing the solid hot foiling, and you can see with this Facets Glimmer foil, it's really quite bold. So these are all solid hot foils that I would never use as is. What I would use them for is to die cut different pieces out of and to use as mats. So we're going to be using a lot of those, or most of that. I think I'll use all of it actually, either die cutting different elements or using them as mats behind pieces. So with all of my foiling done, I put my Glimmer machine to the side to cool down, and now I can do my die cutting. So the press plates come with different dies to cut them out. I like to tape those dies in place just to make sure it's not going to shift when I'm doing my die cutting. I think that's the easiest way to do it, is to make sure by just using some Best Ever Craft tape, taping those in place. And those pieces of tape I reuse over and over again until they don't stick, basically. So even the tape that I use in my Glimmer machine when I'm taping plates down, and I don't do it often because I tend to get a little bit lazy when it comes to that. I just let it cool and then I reuse that as well. So Best Ever Craft tape goes a really long way. There's a lot of tape on each one of those rolls, but when you use each one of those pieces of tape multiple times, it goes a long, long way. So I'm also doing my die cutting for those solid hot foil sentiments as well. Again, they're a little bit too flashy, and I think it's really hard to read the sentiments on them, so I would never use them for that, but I do use them as shadows for my other sentiments, and they work really well for that. Just adds a little bit of extra sparkle. So for my glimmered disco ball impressions here, I'm using the coordinating layering stencils, and I'm going to stencil in the open areas. So the first pad that I'm using is the Lisa Horton Silver Metallic pad. This is a gorgeous silver metallic. It is a limited edition. It comes in a set of 3, so there's a silver, gold, and copper. They are absolutely gorgeous, and they have a beautiful shine. They work well on both black and white cardstock. So you can see I'm having a little bit of challenge matching up my glimmer or my stencil for the second ball here. It's because you have to flip it over, like, or flip it or turn it around 180 degrees, then it matches perfectly. So I made the assumption that it was going to, I just had to kind of shift that stencil down and match them up, but you have to turn it 180 degrees and then it matches up really, really easily. So for my second color here, I'm using some Lost Shadow Distress ink. I do a lot of ink blending with my distress inks. I just like the way they look. I have all the colors of them, so they're really easy to grab. I'm going to do the same thing on my medium-sized disco impression ball here. The one thing that I don't do, though, is I don't use some tape to mask off, so I would recommend doing that if you have yours positioned in a similar way to mine. I will do it for the subsequent stencils now that I've done that. It's not going to work, not going to be a issue for this card because I do plan on ink blending the background, so that's going to be covered, but it's always nice to avoid those things to start. So to tape my stencil down or to mask it off, I just use some painter's tape. And again, this is painter's tape that I used for a previous project, so it's been used. If you're using new painter's tape, I would recommend pressing it down on your t-shirt or pants or whatever, just to get some of the sticky off, just to make it a little bit easier to take off of that paper. Make sure that it doesn't want to stick permanently. And I never leave those pieces of tape there long. I just have them on there while I'm stenciling. But you can see that when possible, I will just do my stenciling with pushing that mat down on my sticky mat to hold it. So all 3 layers of the smallest disco ball impression is on the same stencil. So I go through them just doing the distress ones first. So I did Hickory Smoke first because that's what I had on my brush already. And then I did Lost Shadow. And then I went in and matched up the stencil and did the silver one. Now I wanted to do the silver one last because I didn't want to have to wipe off my stencil to make sure that I didn't get a contamination between the silver pad and my distress pads. And this was the easiest way to do it. Each one of those stencils does different areas of the disco ball, and I really don't think it matters which one you do first. So by doing that silver last, I can just make sure that I'm not going to contaminate anything. You could do it first and then make sure to clear or clean off the stamp or the stencil, but it was just easier to do the distress ones and not need to worry about making sure that that stencil was completely cleaned off. So now we have our disco balls stenciled, and I also did the cord to hang it up. That's on that same stencil there. I did that in the silver. You could also use a silver gel pen and just draw lines on there. That would work as well. Now this impressions or press plate comes with 3 different circle dies to cut out those circles or to cut out those disco balls. I'm going to use them with some masking magic to create 3 different masks because I want to do some ink blending on that background, and I don't want to contaminate or get any of that ink on my disco balls. I want to make sure that they are nice and pristine and only have the silver and the grays on them. So this is the easiest way to do it, is using the Masking Magic. And if you've never used it before, it's kind of like a Post-it note. It's nice and thin, and you can reuse them several times. So once I'm done with this, I will put the backing back on, put them in the same packaging as the Disco Impression press plate, and then they will be ready to go for future projects. For ink blending on my background, I'm using 3 more Distress inks. So I'm using Speckled Egg for the lightest color, Faded Jeans, and then Chipped Sapphire. I'm starting with this Speckled Egg right around the disco balls. I want to make sure that I have kind of the lightest color right there. I want it to look like they kind of are sparkling or emitting light or reflecting light. Then I'm going to go in with the Faded Jeans. And you can see that I'm going a lot darker towards the edges. I want to have a really nice dark edge and light right around those disco balls. Now I'm using a Spellbinders ink blending brush. This way I can get as light or heavy as possible. And I love the fact that they are nice and large, so you can get a lot of ink blending done at once, but you can get a lot of ink on each one of the brushes if you want them to be really dark ink blending. So you have a little bit more control where this is concerned. And by going from light to dark, I can make sure that I can get the lightest color first without having to clean off my brush from that darker ink. So once this is totally done, I can take off those masks, and you can see how bright and pristine they are on that ink blended background. You'd never get that if you didn't mask them off, so that is really the best way to do it. You could also, if you don't have Masking Magic, you could use printed or printer paper and die cut it and then use some removable adhesive on that. That would work as well. You would just need to make sure that your adhesive went all the way to the edge, so when you're doing your ink blending, it doesn't catch on the edges of that cardstock, as well as the fact that the printer paper will start to absorb the ink. So it's something that you could only use one time. So I do like to use the Masking Magic just to make sure that I can use it multiple times, and I know the ink is not going to start to break down that Masking Magic. So with my card image done, we can start assembling the card. So I did use one of those negative foiled images, and you can see that if you look really closely, my negative foiled image goes all the way to the edge. But because that Holographic Facets Glimmer foil is so busy, you really have to look to actually see it. So my solid hot foiled image there was cut down to 4 inches by 5 1/4. My disco ball image for the front of the card was cut down to 3 7/8 inch by 5 1/8 inch. So you see just a little bit of that glimmer foil around that matte or around the disco ball image. It's enough to highlight that sparkle in the disco balls, but not so much that it's going to take away from it. So for my sentiments, I'm using one of the Sparkle On sentiments, and I used the negative hot foiled image from that same sentiment, glued it behind it, and just shifted it slightly. So it has almost a little bit of a shadow that is that Holographic Facets Glimmer foil, but not so much that it detracts. It just enhances it a little bit, gives it a little bit of sparkle below. You don't necessarily need to use it if you don't want it. If you don't like that look, you can just leave that off, or you could use that solid hot foiled image just to add a little bit of bulk behind that sentiment. I'm using one of the sentiment strips, and I'm putting it on the inside. I didn't really like it on the bottom of the front of the card. I kind of thought it made it a little bit too busy, and I liked it with just those disco balls and that Sparkle On sentiment, but I do like it inside. And for that one, I also used that negative foiled image and glued it behind, but just lowered it slightly so it gave a little bit of a shadow. For my second card, I'm going to do a spinner card, and I wanted to use one of the disco ball dies. I'm using the medium size here, and I'm using the larger size circle die for cutting out the larger die. I'm going to create a circle or a window opening in my card, and I'm going to use that circle die for that. Now, I was planning on using the mirror silver card from the Silver Treasured Cardstock pack, but as I was opening it up, I was curious what the glitter cardstock would look like as that disco ball. So I did cut one just to see if it would be, or if I would like it better than the mirror cardstock, I didn't like it better, so I just set that to the side. I'll use it for a future project. You lost some of the detail, in my opinion, when you use that. So by using that silver mirrored cardstock, you still get all of that detail in there, and you get their high shine with that mirrored cardstock. So I'm cutting 2 of those. I want them to go back to back to create my spinner element, and I thought that was perfect for a disco ball to spin in the opening. So I do cut off the excess when I'm cutting this, because I've got some plates here that are very, 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 very well used. If I left all of that excess cardstock, a lot of that texture would get imprinted on that mirror cardstock. So by cutting around those dies, I could avoid getting all of that texture in my remaining pieces here. So I'm going to use some of that solid hot foiled pieces or piece for my mat for this as well. I just really love the look of it around there. Now, as I've done in previous videos, you could use the center of this and die cut pieces out of it if you wanted to for some elements for the cards. I found that there was enough solid hot foiled pieces that I didn't need to. So my solid hot foiled piece there was cut down to 5 3/8 by 4 1/8. My image piece, or the piece for the front of my card, is cut to 4 inches by 5 1/4. And I'm just using some temporary adhesive to glue them to the front of my card so that I can cut that circle hole opening in that card. And I want that positioned the same for all 3 of those pieces. So I have those temporarily glued together with that adhesive. I'm going to use some Best Ever Craft tape to tape that circle die in place. I'm opening my card up, and then I'm going to put it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine to die cut that hole. And it's not going to die cut through all of those layers. It actually does die cut through the top 2. You can see that I'm struggling with my machine, and that's because I'm going through 3 layers of thick cardstock. It's easier on your machine if you did, say, the 2 upper layers, the matte piece as well as the image piece, and then position them on your card, or position one of them on your card and did the card piece there. I just did it all at once. I wanted to make sure that they were all in exactly the same spot. So the die went through the first top 2 layers. Now I can tape it exactly where it goes on my card base. Because I have the impression of the die from running it through the first time, I know exactly where it goes. You just move it on the top of the space there, and it just kind of pops into where it was before. So it makes it really easy to make sure that you have perfect placement. For this upper piece here, I'm going to do some more ink blending, and I'm using the same color scheme for all of my cards in this video because I really love the look of the silver with the blue. It just worked really well for me. So I just kept it through the whole thing. I didn't want to change that up. I love the look of those together. So I'm using those same speckled egg, faded jeans, and chip sapphire. Starting off with the speckled egg closest to where that disco ball is going to be hanging in the opening, then doing the faded jeans around it, and then the chip sapphire around the outside edges. And you can see that I am getting quite heavy around the edges. Again, I really love the look of the dark navy with the silver from the foil. So I want to make sure that there's some really nice contrast, and I also want to make sure that the lightness around the edge of that circle really makes it look like there's light refracting or reflecting off of that disco ball. I'm using that same Spellbinders large ink blending brush. I really love how they feel in my hand when I'm using them, and I like the fact that I have control over doing light ink blending or heavy ink blending. So once all of that ink blending is done there, I can put that to the side. I have several different sentiment strips here that I want to use with this card, but I want to have them ink blended in that chip sapphire to give that contrast of the dark navy with that glimmer foil, as well as the fact that I wanted to make them look just a little bit different from the sentiment strip from my previous card. And you can use distress inks over top of that glimmer foil. The glimmer foil resists it, so you're not going to ruin it in any way. And in my opinion, you can actually see the sentiment just a little bit better because of that dark background. So if you have problems doing hot foiling on colored cardstock, an option for you might be to do the hot foiling on the white Hammermill cardstock and then do ink blending to create that color. And then you can also have the control over getting your color really, really heavy or really light. You can pick and choose exactly how you want it to look. So with my front of my card and my card base all ready to go, I can start putting my shaker or my spinner element together. So I have a piece of silver cord here. I'm going to run it right through that disco ball die cut. I have some Suk Wang tape there that I've put strips over or on the back of that die cut before gluing them together. It's just a really nice strong tape. I don't need to wait for it to dry, and I know it's going to hold this element. So I will use that Suk Wang tape regularly when I'm doing things like this, because I want to make sure that there's no chance of that element being pulled out or anything. And I've had good success with that Suk Wang tape. I've used it for many, many years. So I put one strip on top of the opening, one below, and then I go and add a few more strips and put a little bit of that Suk Wang tape over top of the cord as well. Again, I want to make sure that it's holding it really, really well. So you probably don't necessarily need to add that extra strip of tape over top of it. I just like the extra assurance that it's going to hold everything perfectly. Once I have it taped in place, I can cut off the excess of that cord. And I'm just using a silver cord here. It doesn't necessarily need to be silver. It just goes with the color scheme. You can use whatever cord or thread you want. I just want to make sure that it can hold up to it. I wouldn't use anything stretchy or anything for this. I want to make sure that it's not going to sag or stretch, and it's just going to hold into place. And then even though I have that Suk Wang tape on there, I did use some Barely Art glue, or my liquid glue that I like to use, to put around the edges to hold everything in place there. And you can see how that spinner element works. You can spin it and then close your card, put it in an envelope, and then when the recipient takes it out of the envelope and then opens up their card, that disco ball is going to spin. So it's a fun little unexpected element for them, and I just love how it works perfectly with that disco ball. I use the same Sparkle on Sentiments as my first card, using the negative hot foiled piece to glue behind it and just slightly below it so that you see just a tiny little bit of that shadow. I'm going to do the same thing for my ink blended sentiment strips for the inside of the card. So I'm just matching up the solid hot foiled sentiments for each. That way I know they're the perfect size for it. I'll put a little bit of glue towards the lower part of that die cut, place it on the solid hot foiled piece just a little bit shifted so you see that sparkle from that. Now originally when I had picked these sentiments, they kind of make a full sentiment all on their own. They work well together. I had envisioned them just going on the inside of the card, and as I was gluing these pieces together, I realized that if I just put them on the inside of the card, you would see the strips through the opening on the front of my card. So there's two solutions for this. You could put an inside piece, put an inside card to hide that. I didn't want to do that because it was going to add extra bulk to the card. My card bases are thick anyways, plus the negative hot foil piece, plus the ink blended image piece for the front. So I thought that was going to add a little bit too much bulk. So what I chose to do instead was glue these sentiments on the inside left part of my card so that they are hidden from the front, and there's still lots of space on the inside right part of my card to write a message if you wanted, without having to write it where that opening is. So before I go to glue those sentiments on the inside, I'm using some of the little sparkly bits, or sparkly, I don't know what you would call these, from that Glimmer foil set. They are Glimmer foiled in the same foil as the rest of my Glimmer foiling, and then die cut off screen. And I'm just putting them on the front, just placing them where I think they work well. I try to use all three sizes, and I also try to make sure that I don't have the same ones clustered together. I like to dry fit them or place them on before gluing them, just to make sure that I have that freedom to change my mind before gluing them. You're not stuck to it if you start gluing things down before you like the placement or are ready to have them placed there permanently. You're kind of stuck with it. So by putting them down and not gluing them quite yet, I can make sure that I like all of the placements before I am committed to them. So once I have all of these pieces glued on here, I can glue those sentiment strips on the inside of the card. It's also a good idea to make sure that the shadow part of those sentiment strips are glued in place and that glue has started setting before gluing them on the inside of the card. So that's another reason why I'm doing that in this order. So once I have that front piece done, I did put my acrylic block on there and let them sit for a few minutes to make sure that that glue had really started setting and holding things together before working on the inside part. And I'm going to do that same thing for the inside sentiments here too. If you haven't seen my videos before, I do this often where I use that acrylic block just to hold things down, holds everything nice and flat, frees up my hands to work on other things or to be gluing other things in place. I don't like sitting there and holding something down for it to glue. Even though this glue starts to grab fairly quickly, I want to say within like 10-15 seconds, I don't like sitting there for that 10-15 seconds. So by having an acrylic block just to hold everything down flat, doing that for me frees up my hands to work on other things. So you can see it works fairly well to have these sentiments on the inside left part of the card. I could have used this same spacing and put them on the inside right of the card, but the reason I didn't do that is then it eliminates the space on the inside right of the card to write a sentiment. You would have to put it on the left side. So I figured this was a good compromise here. And you can see how that spinner works. Before closing it up and putting it in your envelope, you would twist it all and then you have a nice surprise for your recipient. So for my next card, I'm using those same Disco Impressions disco balls, and I am going to use the layered stencils to color them. And I'm going to use the same colors that I used for my previous one. I'm just using the medium-sized disco ball here. I'm not doing multiple ones. I'm just doing one. So I'm using the Distress inks in Lost Shadow as well as Hickory Smoke, and then also that silver ink from the Lisa Horton Crafts, the Silver Shine Metallic ink, which has a gorgeous shimmer to it. It's one of those inks that is one of my favorite metallic inks right now. I love the shine that you get, and I love how it works really, really well on both the white and the black cardstock. So I am trying to concentrate my Distress ink a little bit heavier around the outside than on the inside. I want it to make it look like it has a little bit of a shadow to it. It's one of those things that's very subtle because of the fact that that Glimmer foil is so sparkly and so prominent. You'd have to really look to see that, but I really like the look that it gives. So for my background for this card, I'm using that sparkle background Glimmer plate, and I'm going to use those same three blue Distress inks, the Speckled Egg, the Faded Jeans, and the Chip Sapphire. I'm starting again with that Speckled Egg, and I am using some scrap paper to kind of mask a line where that Glimmer plate ends. I figured I would play on the fact that that Glimmer plate doesn't necessarily do like a full circle with the rays going out. So I have that mask on there. I'm doing the one side first, and then I will move that mask and do some ink blending on the other side. So again, I start with that lightest color, the Speckled Egg, then do the Faded Jeans, and then do the Chip Sapphire. And I'm making sure that I'm getting some really heavy ink blending towards the edges. I want to have that prominent contrast there. And you could see when I did my first ink blending, I kind of went in a large circle around those rays. And once I had the ink where I wanted it to, or kind of blended where I wanted it to, then I concentrated a little bit more towards the edges because I kind of knew where the limit or where the edge to each one of those colors was. So after I moved that paper for my mask, I'm just doing some heavy ink blending with that Chip Sapphire on the other edge, again wanting some really nice contrast. Another option here would be to use a strip of navy cardstock, and that's what I had originally planned to do, but then I figured because I had those inks out already, I already had them on my brushes. By doing that ink blending, I knew I was going to have perfect coordination. I wasn't going to have to try to match a navy cardstock. So this was the easiest way to do it. And again, I had it all out there ready to go. So now I'm taking that background there and cutting it down. And then I'm going to use one of those solid hot foiled pieces behind it again. And this is one of the ones that I die cut the disco balls out of. Again, it doesn't matter if you've die cut in the center of it, as long as you can see that whole edge on the for the mat, no one's ever going to know that something was die cut out of it. And you can see that one of my edges there is really, really thin. So I'm putting my piece here on top of it just to make sure that I have enough of that showing, or that I'm not going to see any of that open area from that die cut, and you don't. So again, no one would ever know that there's anything die cut out of this. So use your specialty papers to their most, or their as much as possible. This is a great way to stretch them out and get more use out of them. It kind of seems weird when you see me gluing it together, but again, you never would know once everything is glued together. So that solid hot foil piece is trimmed down to 5 3/8 inches by 4 1/8 inch. And then my ink blended glimmered piece here is cut down to 4 inches by 5 1/4. So we see very, very little of that solid hot foil piece around it, but it's just enough to really highlight it and highlight the glimmer foiling on that image piece there. I wanted to add the Shine Bright sentiment here, but I didn't want to do my sentiment in that glimmer foiled piece. So I'm using some brushed silver cardstock from that Silver Treasure cardstock pack. This one has some nice shine to it, but not so much that it's going to take away from my glimmered background or my disco ball element. I was afraid that if I used the negative hot foil pieces for these letters, that it was just going to, they were all going to kind of fight with each other on the front of the card. So here I have some silver that's going to tie in really nicely with it, but it's not going to fight for attention basically. And I'm just using a very simple white shadow with this that's going to tie in with the glimmer foil simply because it goes well with it, as well as the white cardstock base. So once I have these glued down, I put my acrylic block on there just to hold them down. And I can start gluing it onto the front of the card once everything is completely dry. I always find that it's much easier to glue my sentiments or my letters to my shadows before putting them on the card, because then I can shift them around on the front of my card and make sure that I see exactly where I like it best. So I always love having a shadow for those sentiments to be able to do that. And you can see with the liquid glue, it gives you a little bit of wiggle room to shimmy and move these letters in place. I really love using liquid glue, and I use it for mostly everything. Not only does it just go a little bit farther than tape runners or double-sided tape, but it also gives you that wiggle room that I like so much, especially when you're trying to put sentiments or letters on top of a shadow. It's nice to be able to have that wiggle room and get perfect placement. So once that glue has started to set, and again, only you have to wait like 10-15 seconds. You don't have to wait a whole lot or a whole long amount of time. I'm going to glue that to the front of my card. I love the look of that disco ball with those rays kind of shining out. And this particular one also has just little kind of sparkles on those rays as well. So it works really, really well. Adding the Shine Bright, and then I'm going to add one of those sentiment strips. I want to do it after gluing all of my main elements in place, because I want to make sure that these are prominent there, and I want this sentiment strip just to kind of be the final element, and I don't want to have the disco ball in front of it blocking some of those letters. So here is the finished third card. I absolutely love the sentiments that are in these collections. They're perfect for encouragement cards, and they're very unique sentiments. They're ones that I haven't seen in a lot of places, so I absolutely love that. For my last card, I'm going to use the Shine Bright layering stencil. I'm using my sticky mat again, putting my Hammermill cardstock, which is what I'm going to do my ink blending on there, and then placing this stencil shadow down first, doing a little bit of ink blending with my lost shadow, and then I can start placing my letters on there. Now the piece of Hammermill cardstock here that I'm using is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So you can see that the stencil is just a little bit bigger than that, but not much bigger than that. So I am using some pieces of painter's tape just to hold it down, just to make sure it's not going to shift. Because there's such a little area of that stencil touching my sticky mat, there's a very good chance that if I didn't have it taped down, that it would start to shift on me. And I wanted to make sure that I had a full 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece here doing the stenciling so that I could trim it down once I was done. So when lining this stencil up, I lined up the left-hand side opening with the edge of my paper. I knew that it was going to leave an area to cut off if I positioned it in a little bit more, and I wanted to make sure to have all of those letters on the piece of cardstock. For my second layer, I'm using the Lisa Horton Crafts Silver Shine ink pad that I've been using throughout this video, and I'm just doing that whole layer with that color there. And you can see I've used this ink several times with the different stencils throughout this video. It washes off really easily as well. Sometimes I need to use my fingers just to kind of rub on the stencil, but I haven't used any cleaners at all. If you needed or wanted to, you could use some gentle dish soap to add a little bit of soap to your water, but I rarely ever do that. I don't find that it's needed. Typically just some warm water, and then I'll just use my fingers to kind of rub on the stencil if I have something that's a little bit more stubborn there. Rarely do I ever have to use cleaners. So for my next layer, I'm using the Speckled Egg Distress ink and just ink blending through that layer of stencil. This particular one does all sorts of different rays coming back from those letters. After you've gotten that shadow, that first shadow there, they're really quite easy to position. I've used this stencil before for a previous project. This was part of the Weekender event that Spellbinders did in the spring. So I'm familiar with how this stencil layers, but if you're not sure of it, what I would do is use a scrap piece of paper to start and just kind of get familiar with the stencil and where the different layers lie. These ones aren't numbered. These stencils aren't numbered, so it doesn't give you a number order that you need to use them in. But I did find by starting with that shadow and then just working my way through the stencil, starting with the first one that had the kind of shadow or the rays coming from the S, I found it really easy after that to position all the different layers. And you can see that I'm trying to get a little bit heavier where those letters are and towards the bottom of those rays, but I'm not too worried about my ink blending being absolutely perfect. There's so much going on with a lot of these cards, especially with that glimmer foil on them, that I think a lot of those details that sometimes we get a little bit caught up with are just, you're not going to really necessarily see them on this card. Now, when I had this stenciled background done, I really loved the rays of the silver from the silver ink pad, but I didn't want to go back and add silver ink pad over top of those colors. I didn't want them to hide that. So I took a silver gel pen and a ruler, and I'm just running the little stripes down the edge of the ruler just to get some of that silver in there. And it's an easy way to do it. A gel pen is fairly thin and narrow, so you're not going to be covering up a lot of those colors, but you're just going to add that silver highlight there, and I really love the touch that it gives. You definitely want to be using a ruler for this just to make sure that those lines are nice and straight. Once that is done, I can take that off of my sticky mat and we're ready to go with the rest of the card. So that is going to be my background. I'm using the remainder of the negative hot foil pieces that I have, and these are the only pieces that I have left. So I've used a lot of them with this card, so there's very little left once I'm done. I cut out those letters for that Shine Bright die cut. For this particular card, I'm not using the background or the shadow for those letters. I'm just using the letters themselves. I took some white scrap paper and cut them out with one layer of white to glue behind them just to give them a little bit of extra dimension and to add a little bit of silver shimmer around the edge of that stenciled piece. I just rubbed the edges of the paper along that silver ink pad. Let that dry before gluing it onto the front of my card. Before I had rubbed this silver on there, I had cut my image piece or my stencil piece down to 4 inches by 5 1/4. So you definitely want to do that before putting the silver ink around the outside edges. Sometimes I have to wait till I put it on my card base to remember what size I had trimmed it to though. So yeah, trim it down, rub it against the edges of that paper, and it just gives you a very simple matte. You could also use some of the Silver Treasure cardstock for adding that matte as well, but I also love being able to use an ink pad for that. I'm going to put 2 disco balls on this card, and I wanted to add the hanging cord for them. Rather than using the first layering stencil that I was using, I just used that same silver gel pad or pen with a ruler to draw in the little hanging cords for them. These disco balls here, one of them is just a regular, it's the small regular glimmer foiled Disco Impressions plate. The other one is the negative, the medium negative foiled, and it takes a lot to be able to tell the difference between the two. Now, obviously, there is no stencil that matches that negative hot foiled one because this layering stencil is meant to color in the openings of the regular foiled one. So I just used some of the Lost Shadow Distress Pad and just ink blended in there just to get a little bit of color there. And then once those are glued down, I can glue on my letters. And these letters are the same size and scale as the stenciled letters, so you know exactly where they go. It works perfect. And I love the look of that sparkly glimmer foiled letter with the kind of rays or shadows or whatever you want to call it behind there. I think it creates a really, really cool look to it. So after everything is glued in place, I put that acrylic block on there just to hold it down nicely. These letters are really nice block letters, so they work perfectly for this. And I love the way the foil ties in with the little disco balls as well. Off screen, I used the little sparkly dies from that disco balls die set and die cut out of some of those negative hot foiled pieces. And then I'm just placing them where I want them to go on my card. Once again, same as the first time I did this on the the second card. I placed them down first before committing and gluing them down. And some of these pieces, because my negative hot foiled pieces were so tiny, I had used up most of it in these cards. Some of these pieces went off the edge, so I have like a partial die cut. I'm still using them. I'm just putting them against the edges of my cardstock piece here or against the edges of that disco ball there. Any of the pieces that don't fit properly, I just use my scissors to trim them. And you'd never know. It looks like they're meant for this. It looks like they're all customized. So this is where it takes a lot of coordination. I'm using a jewel picker to pick up those die cuts, using my left hand, which is not my dominant hand, to try to squeeze a little bit of glue in there and then press that die cut into there. So this is one of those talents that I don't do very often because I'm really not good at it and it's really not comfortable, but it is good to challenge yourself at times. So, and it's a lot easier really to use both hands than to remove the die cut and then pick up the glue bottle and then pick up the jewel picker. So it does save a little bit of time there, but again, not comfortable. So here are our final cards. We have the Shine Bright with that stenciled background. I love the look of that stenciled background. It has such a unique look to it, and combination of the blues with that Holographic Facets foil. I love the combination of that. But again, you can use whatever foil you want, or you can use whatever colors you want to go with it. It doesn't have to be these colors. I just really love the combination. Regular glimmer foil would work as well. And because these are press plates, other than that glimmered background plate, you could use them in your betterpress system, use silver inks with them or whatever color inks you want, or use them with embossing ink and then emboss with silver embossing powder, or again, whatever color embossing powder you want. I love the interactive element of the little disco ball on the spinner card here, and you could swap out the disco ball die cut with those glimmer disco balls. I think those would look fantastic as well, but I wanted to show a little bit of variety. So I love the fact that these are great for encouragement. These would be perfect for New Year's as well, or even just kind of a party or a dance party or whatever that is a disco themed. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know this video was just a little bit longer, but I really appreciate all of the time that you spend with me, and I hope you have a fantastic day.